This is Social Leopards. I'm Bea.
And I'm Beth. A leopard is a solitary creature living in the jungle but often not seen or noticed. Are you a solitary creature trying to navigate the social jungle?
This show explores loneliness and the many ways forward. Welcome to Social Leopards.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And today we are here with Macfayden, and his Substack intro reveals the following. He overcame PTSD after a 20-year fight which nearly destroyed him. He now uses what he learned to help people overcome challenges related to PTSD and mental health, and that's through building resilience in their daily lives. And so we're so happy to have you here with us, Liam.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So what transpired in your life that eventually inspired you to become an advocate for mental health and trauma awareness?
Yeah, so I joined the police in 2003 and very quickly saw trauma after trauma. So after about 3 months of being a police officer, I was called with it was a Saturday night and I was with my sergeant, and we were called to two teenage girls that had it sounded like they'd fallen from the sky. I just want to check, how graphic do you want me to be in this?
I think you can share whatever is in your heart and on your mind. This is an over 18 podcast, so it's all adults listening.
Yep.
Okay, so I was called to two girls. It sounded like they'd fallen out of the sky, which is what the caller had said. And it turned out that they'd both jumped off of a tower block. One was 16 and one was 18. When I got there, the 16-year-old was still barely alive, and she was taken away quite quickly. The 18-year-old was already dead, and I was tasked with guarding her body for about 4 hours. And throughout that time, there was other police around, but they were doing other things. So it was just me and her for 4 hours. So I got to absorb every injury, the sort of loneliness of the situation where there was no one else to reach out to for that time. And I felt different afterwards, but I held my sadness in. I realised that I knew of the girl that had died because I used to work in a shop and she lived across the road from the shop. So I pieced together that although I wasn't friends with her, I knew of her, but I had to hold it in because I was a police officer and police officers have to appear to be strong. But I knew once I left the police station later that morning that something was different in me, and that's when my descent into post-traumatic stress disorder happened. I had therapy briefly, and that was the only time that it worked. But it worked to the extent that my colleagues then deemed that I could go back to policing, and that led to more traumas. And by that point, therapy never worked for me again. And then that gradually I got worse and worse until I was medically retired at 27. And when I was medically retired, I was told I was 100% disabled for the rest of my life.
Oh, wow.
So your therapist told you were disabled? Like, how do they come to that conclusion?
Psychiatrists told, because the police were going to have to assess me for whether I was eligible for an injury award, they made it as hard as possible to be diagnosed. So they sent me to two psychiatrists and a doctor, a false medical examiner, and they all diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the false medical examiner said 100% disabled for the rest of my life.
Wow.
It sounds like over time, and I'm just assuming this, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but sure. I would assume that as the traumas start to layer one upon one another, that becomes very isolating as perhaps a coping mechanism. Can you explain that a little bit about that time in your life when you were trying to keep going and you realized that you were just adding to the problem?
Yeah, so I was very eager to go back to policing after that first incident. So I was over the moon that the doctors at that point said that I could. And after that, I went to... The first incident was by far the one that affected me the most, but then I went to a lot of other ones. Like the very next one I went to was a young man that hadn't been seen for a couple of weeks, and there was a bad smell coming out of where he lived. And as I broke the door down, I bumped into him because he'd hung himself by the door. And he'd been there for 2 weeks. That was much more visually intense than the first one, but for some reason I found the first one sadder. I don't know why, because they're both sad, but it's just how my mind works. And as time went on, I couldn't relate to the average person, because the average person doesn't understand the things that I'm talking about. So I relied more and more on other police. The police have got a very macho culture where you don't show weakness, so that wasn't healthy for me. For a while I was drinking too much to try and cope with the pressure, and then eventually when I was medically retired at 27, hardly any police kept in contact with me, and the ones that did gradually didn't, because I suppose there's only so many times you can phone someone and ask them to come out, and they don't want to come out because I could barely leave my house. The police fell away. They were the only ones that understood what I was experiencing. So at that point I had no one that really understood. My mum and my partner were lifesavers and really stepped up and helped me, but they've never suffered these sort of situations. And so I'd lost the only sort of support network that I had that understood, that had been in the same situations.
So how did you eventually start getting yourself out of that PTSD? What was the thing that made the most difference, the first thing?
Yeah, as well as PTSD, I then was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I was also diagnosed with depression. I managed to overcome that thanks to, the main thing was medication that helped me overcome that. And medication brought me to a level where I could then reassess the life that my life was in effect ruined by that point. I hardly ever left the house. I had no interest, no hobbies. So the medication brought me to a point where I could actually get out of bed and then do stuff to help myself. But without the medication, I don't know where I'd be, because I needed that boost to get going. But in terms of overcoming the post-traumatic stress disorder, that has only happened in the last few years, and that came about mainly through, first I discovered a love for writing, which helped me, one, make sense, put the pain that I'd suffered to good use, because I could use it to help other people, and two, I realised that I loved the process of creating through writing. And ironically, I think I've helped more people through writing than I ever did through being a policeman. And I saved myself a lot of trauma along the way. So I just wish I could have skipped the police part and gone straight to the writing.
I do think that the one thing that makes a difference, and you've experienced it, I think, is you finally realized you were not alone by taking your story out and giving people, telling people what happened to you, and then you interacted and you helped other people, and that whole relationship that you created just, I think, also saved you. Would you think that's true?
Yeah, in trying to help others, I helped myself, and also writing untangles the knots that are in my head. To write, you have to clarify what you're thinking, and a lot of time I hadn't clarified. It was all just spinning around in vicious circles in my mind, and obviously the pain wasn't wasted if I could put it to good use, and until that point I hadn't been able to put it to good use. But I was still at that point plagued with flashbacks and nightmares and intrusive thoughts and all the classic PTSD type symptoms. And I tried for 20 years. I tried therapy after therapy, and at best they hadn't worked, and at worst I found the therapist terrible. And so I realised that I had to do something to help myself, because I'd already been in a mental hospital briefly, and I'd seen what life was going to be like for me if I didn't get better. So I did a thing based on gradual exposure. I broke my traumas down into segments. So the first segment could be writing about the trauma. So I've not had to say anything out loud, and I've not had to put myself in any kind of risky situation. Just writing it on the screen and seeing how that felt. And at first that was a bit stressful, but the more I wrote about it, the easier it was. So then the next stage was to talk about the trauma. Maybe not in graphic detail, but just say what it was, where I'd been, and what had happened. Then the third stage was more detail, so say to someone who's able to listen what I'd seen, what the injuries were, and everything else. Then the next stage would be to go to the scenes of where the traumas were, because at one point I couldn't go to, there was whole cities where I couldn't go because they reminded me of what had happened. So I confronted going to those places and feeling that stress. And gradually, by doing this step by step, I got to the point where these traumas have no weight over me anymore at all. I don't have flashbacks, I don't have nightmares, I can talk about whatever. and I've got
Wow.
no problems anymore.
I'm really impressed with how you did that, but that was a brilliant way of doing it.
Thanks.
Uh,
I do still have to take meds, so I've not completely gone back to normal, but yeah.
I'll share that my mother was on medication for the majority of her adult life, and I always knew when she would start self-dosing down.
Oh yeah.
And it was a chemical imbalance, and so when that brain imbalance started to lean one way, then she would become very illogical in her thinking. So medication has its place, and it is
Definitely.
obviously a lifesaver in certain instances, because I'm sure that a lot of people who don't understand or never become diagnosed, or there are people that are struggling big time, and they just don't even understand why, and they don't see the point in seeking help. This is a really strong story about the importance of seeking help, because it can definitely make a difference. And it doesn't mean that self-help isn't playing a part in that. You still have to take control and do the things that are going to help you feel healed holistically, right?
Yeah.
But medication definitely has its place when it's appropriate.
Yeah, and you're really lucky that you found the one that works for you, probably is biochemically good for you, doesn't give you a huge amount of side effects, because I think that is the first thing that people struggle with when they have like depression or traumatic experience, is getting the correct one. And it's hard to figure out how to do it for doctors, and sometimes they'll try so many that the person just gives up and never gets the right medication, never really gets better. So I'm so pleased that you found the right people to help you and get that right medication for you.
I mean, that was a long, tough process, because I have to take antipsychotics, antidepressants, and a mood stabilizer, and it took maybe 10 different types of meds to find the good one. And along the way, I mean, I've always loved doing martial arts and exercise, but when I started taking antipsychotics for the first time, I gained 85 pounds of weight in a year, which was another nail in the depression for me, because it took yet another thing that I loved away, which was being fit. And as well as doing that, my speech slurred with these antipsychotics. I was sleeping up to 15 hours a day, and it was unbearable. And the problem is, these different meds have you have to give them 6 weeks usually to see if they're going to work. So if you've got really bad depression, you're desperate for something to work, you've got to give it 6 weeks, and then if you find it doesn't work, you've got to try another one and give that 6 weeks, and it feels like years. And luckily they found the right combination, which strangely, I'd already been on those meds before without much success. Then we tried them again, and then the depression went and hasn't come back. And the depression is the biggest thing that really destroyed me. I know comparative schizophrenia might be a more severe illness, but it's always been the depression that scares the life out of me, because that takes away every bit of enjoyment and every bit of hope in life. Eventually I got lucky, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Depression is huge. Yeah, it affects everything. Yep.
yeah, and it's a term that's thrown around a lot, but I think a lot of people don't understand what the difference between sadness and depression.
Yeah.
During that time, when you were in that period of struggle before things started to turn for the better, I know that you and I had conversed before the interview about how that gave you that you experienced a lot of loneliness as a result of this almost self-isolation, right?
Yeah.
So can you explain, did you know at the time that you were lonely, or was the depression the more prevailing feeling that you were trying to cope with?
Luckily for me, I don't need a lot of people around. I'm quite okay being on my own, or just with my partner or a friend. I don't need to be around a lot of people, so I'm alright with my own company. But it's nice to have the choice if you wanted to talk to someone that understands the situation. Because as I say, I could always talk to my mum, I could always talk to my partner. My dad was up and down. Sometimes I could talk to him, sometimes not, and they would do their best, but there was no one I could talk to that actually understood the situation. So I felt lonely at times, because I didn't have the choice in the matter. Whereas usually you can be, I want to spend the weekend by myself, but if I wanted to, I could call someone. That'd make a difference. But there was no choice for me, and I was scared to do anything about it because I couldn't leave my house hardly because I had all these mental health problems going on. I was trapped in a way.
Had you dealt with loneliness prior to this period in your life?
But with it, when I was at school, say from the age of 11 to 17, I was bullied quite badly. I never liked sports, so I was a bit overweight. People made fun of me they would make fun of anything they could physically. They would kick me, punch me, spit on me. And it went on all the way up until, because here we finished school at 16, and then we've got the choice if we want to go to college for a couple of years, and then at 18 we can go to university. So college and university are a bit different from what I understand it is like in America. So when I got to college, I thought this will be the chance to reinvent myself. I won't put up with being bullied anymore. But it started again, and that's when I realised that it's not my fault, but it's my responsibility to do something properly about it. And that's when I started doing martial arts. I did karate, I did boxing, I did weight training. I ended up fighting back against the bullies. And by the time I went to university for the first time, I felt confident and I had friends. But up until then, it was horrible. And at that point as well, if I'd go home and talk about the bullying, my dad would get frustrated that I wasn't fighting back. He wanted to take me to boxing classes long before I could conceive of such a thing. So in the end, I felt like I couldn't tell anyone at home. And I tried telling teachers at school, but one of the teachers at school was actually joining in with the name calling. So there was no one to turn to about that, really.
So things have changed so much, luckily, in our schools, and I'm sure too where you live with bullying is they take it very seriously, and it's pretty much cut off very quickly. Gosh, I'm so sorry you had to suffer, but I think you really found a great way of coping. I admire, again, with the sports and just being stronger, and I'm glad that you were able to stop it finally.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that balk at the idea that I say that it's my responsibility to fix the situation. They feel like I'm saying it's my fault, or if you're being bullied, it's your fault. It's not your fault, but the cold reality is that you will have to do something about it. There's help you can get, but it still stops with you, how you accept being treated by other people. And that takes a lot of guts to stand up in that way. Yeah.
Do you think that had any bearing on your desire to become a police officer at the beginning of the story?
Yeah, I think it was 100% the reason, because I always doubted myself physically. So I did martial arts, and I was thinking, but it's still in a controlled environment. I don't like bullies. So how can I test myself physically and stand up against bullies and help other people if I can? And I came to policing, and in the police I had a chance to test myself physically. I had a chance to deal with the sort of people that bully others in society. Not as often as I'd like, but occasionally I got to help people. So but if I hadn't have been bullied, I would never have had the desire to do that, I don't think.
I'm glad that you decided to use that for a positive, because I think you could have also just decided to just become a bully too and just get back at people. So what a great way to just get out of that and do something great with it. I did fear that at one point I could unwittingly become the bully, because I'd become intolerant, because I couldn't take any perceived insult would remind me of being bullied. So, and because now I've become stronger and bigger, I would respond always confrontationally if I thought that people were any perceived slight. And then I realised, hey, over the way you've become quite intolerant, and this isn't any good either. You've gone the pendulum's gone too far the other way. So let's bring it back. Being self-aware enough to know that we've got to come back to the middle again.
So at some point in this journey, there was something that happened. So what was the catalyst or the reason that it suddenly turned from self-preservation to wanting to help others?
You mean with the trauma?
Yes.
yeah, didn't have any purpose in life once I left the police. So it didn't. For a long time, it didn't matter if I got out of bed in the morning. It didn't matter if I could do anything or I could do nothing, and it didn't make any difference. And I tried different things. Like I tried learning Japanese to try and occupy my mind. That was okay for a while, but it didn't really fulfil me. I tried a volunteer job, but unfortunately that was right in the middle of the area where I used to police, and that used to really hurt when I saw police cars go past, going on blue lights, going somewhere, and I thought, oh, that used to be me, but now I'm in this shop. I tried different things, but none of it really resonated or worked to take away that lack of purpose I was feeling. And then I just thought, one day I thought, I found Medium, the website, which is a website where just about anybody can write articles about anything. And I thought, I'll just write one about self-improvement. So I wrote a really bad article about self-improvement, very generic stuff. But I thought that's quite interesting, so I started reading other people's articles, and then I realised that I could write more personal articles about what I'd experienced. So I started to write articles, and at first it was quite painful. Like sometimes I'd write an article and then I'd have nightmares for 3 days, because I thought, if you're going to do this, you've got to do it 100%. And most people, the difference between I thought, how can I differentiate myself from just about the hundreds or the thousands of other people that are out there? And I could do it by being as raw as possible. If it hurt to write it, that was the thing that I feel like I should write. And that's also how I overcame parts of the trauma with the exposure thing, by writing down the things that hurt me the most. And that's what I've tried to do to this day. Now not much hurts me, so it doesn't hurt me to write articles, but until I got used to it, it would stir up bad feelings.
Mm-hmm. And they talk about the way to heal is that you actually have to go there. You have to go to that painful memory, and you have to somehow get it out and get through that pain, and then you can finally heal. So
and I think most people would do that with a therapist. Mm-hmm. But like I say, my experiences of therapy were terrible, so I didn't have that to fall back on, so I had to do it myself.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's very difficult to find an appropriate therapist, just someone who's really experienced in that particular field, who you connect with, who understands you, who's able to listen. So I think all those things. So I don't think it's unique that you had a struggle to find somebody who could really get you. So I'm glad you found something else, though.
Yeah, sure. I had one therapist who used to throw cushions at me. When she was a trauma therapist, and if I was talking to her about trauma and I swallowed, so I just paused to swallow, she'd interpret that as me being about to break down, and she'd throw, all of a sudden a cushion would come across the room, and she'd shout, "Catch!" and then you'd have to catch the cushion, and that's her way of snapping me out of a flashback that I wasn't going into.
Gosh.
Yeah, that was just one experience.
That's almost along that somatic, just shock and reset type of theory in rebooting your neurology, your system, so that you can become objective again. And so that probably does stop that pattern in your brain and allow you to snap back and refocus. But I was doing it when you weren't even going there.
I mean, I had a lot of experts predicting very quick cures for me. So first I've been diagnosed as 100% disabled for the rest of my life. And then from that point on, everybody was promising to cure me in 6 weeks. And then when they found out they couldn't do it so quickly, they gave up and on to the next one, because that's what they'd settled on. We can cure you in 6 weeks, and then you'll be one of our success stories. Because they told me their past success stories, so I would have then been one of theirs. And then when it didn't happen in 6 weeks, and it looked like it would be harder than they thought, off to the next one.
Wow. Yeah. So I can imagine that a lot of people who would be listening to this episode are undergoing some other experience that may not be exactly the same, but they are seeing it's resonating, and it's something that I think a lot of people can draw some parallels from as they're listening. The story of what brought them to a point of pain, or a feeling of not feeling resilient and struggling with some of this. I think that there are a lot of people who would be like, yes, that's me. Mm-hmm. And so if you were talking directly to someone who didn't know what to do, where do they start? What is the thing that you could say that is your nugget of wisdom about how they start down a path towards healing and finding resiliency in their life?
So it would definitely depend on whether the issue was mental health, or loneliness is part of mental health, but mental illness or loneliness in its own right. So if they're experiencing loneliness, then I would say that the gradual exposure thing that I was doing is a good way to deal with it. And I got my gradual exposure theory from an author called Jeff Thompson. And Jeff Thompson was also bullied in his life, and his way out of it was to become a nightclub bouncer and a martialised, and he got in many violent situations. But the point that helps other people from him is he devised a thing called the fear pyramid, and the fear pyramid at the bottom, you put the fears that you've got that, although they upset you, they're the easiest to deal with, and then the next level up harder and harder. So by the top is your biggest fears. But by the time you get to the biggest fear, you're only one level away, because you've overcome so many fears on the way up. So, for example, the first fear could be, if it was spiders, then you break that down to maybe look at a spider, maybe hold a spider, and break it down into as many steps as necessary. So if you're feeling loneliness, what is the easiest thing you could do that will cause you some discomfort, probably, but also that you're most likely to be able to overcome, and then build up from that base. Whatever you do is probably going to feel difficult at first, but once you've overcome a couple of those levels of the fear pyramid, you should have the confidence to know that you've found difficult things and you've overcome them. So for loneliness, perhaps the first one could be making friends online, because that's low risk. The second thing could be either you've got a hobby or finding a hobby that involves joining a club. For example, one of the things I used to really like to do was play chess. I never went to play at a chess club, but that could be one of the things, if you was lonely, you could go to, and you haven't got to worry in those sort of clubs about conversation or icebreakers or nothing, because your focus is the game. But it's still a chance to make friends with someone that already shares your interest. So you're not going into a social situation where you don't know if you've got anything in common. You've already got something in common.
And there's also structure too, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone's there for the same thing. And then that maybe by then you're no longer feeling lonely. Maybe you make friends there. But if you wanted to go further, then the next stage might be going to a bar or somewhere where you don't know whether you're going to make friends or not. Maybe you won't. And although that feels scary now, by the time you've been to the chess club or whatever it is for you, it'll feel less scary to go to the bar to make friends. So it's a steady thing. Now, if it's mental health related, I would definitely go to see a doctor first and be guided by them. And I would, depending on how severe it is, definitely don't fall for this stigma against medication. Medication could be the thing that takes you to a level where then you can look at lifestyle things like the fear pyramid. But there's a lot of hatred against medication out there, and it probably takes a lot of victims because they feel there's a stigma attached to it. And that's the thing. One of the things that I try and hope to overcome for others is you should take what you have to take. There isn't this stigma about physical illnesses when you take meds, so why is there about mental health? And then after you've done the medication, maybe you can go on the fear pyramid for that as well.
Yeah, and I think people are going back to what you said, why is there the fear of mental health? I always think it's the thing that you said in the beginning, that people still want to appear like they're strong, they don't have a problem, and they think people are going to still judge them if they ask for help or say, yes, I'm struggling with mental health or something.
Yeah, and there's a lot of toxic positivity, especially around like one of the things that someone might say is, why are you not trying harder when you've got mental health conditions, when such and such a person has got cancer and they're running a marathon next week? And it's what about, it's quite okay if you had cancer to cry. You haven't got to keep on this toxic positivity that's expected of people. It's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to not be okay. And depression is like I've seen it said that depression is like a cancer, but of the soul, and you can't compare different illnesses. And when people say, oh, why don't you do more? You've only got depression, that person's got cancer. That's because they think depression means that you're having a bad day, or that you're feeling sad, or they don't understand the true nature of these problems.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to trauma and PTSD, and you're out there advocating and sharing your journey and some of the positive reminders about things being okay, are there some common misperceptions that you encounter out there? You write on Substack, and you have a newsletter and a little bit of a community, right?
Yeah.
So are there misconceptions out there that you have to debate healthily?
Yeah, so when I talk about recovery from schizophrenia, I get a lot of people telling me in messages and things, either the nice ones say to me, or the kind of nice ones say to me, you haven't really recovered from schizophrenia because you can't recover. And I've had the other ones calling me a fraud and saying that I'm peddling false belief for people. I don't know why they think I'm a fool, because I don't get much money from doing all this stuff. But they say that I'm peddling a false belief that you can recover. But to me, the fact that I take medication, what I mean by recover is, yes, you have to take the medication for things like schizophrenia, but there's a lot of social things and lifestyle things you can change to live a much better life. And if I don't say that I'm cured of schizophrenia, but I think recovery and cure are different things. So that's one misconception, is that I either knowingly or unknowingly am using the wrong terminology. I get accused of, I get some police abuse, because a lot of people don't like police, so they'll say, it's your job, you should have, what did you expect, and all that kind of stuff. And I get some people attack me because they've obviously got mental health problems. So I've had people say to me that I'm the voice in their head that's destroying them, or something. Very bizarre schizophrenia type theories, and reporting me to Substack for being the algorithm that's destroying their life and stuff like that. But I knew these kind of people would come along, because recently I've grown quite quickly. For me, it's quite a big jump when I've had 700 new subscribers in the last month. And the more people that I reach, there's going to be more trolls and more seriously ill people, because that's just the way that it gets. But the majority of comments I get are very nice, a few here and there.
I kind of stumbled upon your Substack account, and I think what drew me personally was that you were talking about it's okay to feel like it's hard to be vulnerable, but it's okay to be vulnerable. And you were talking both sides at the same time, where it's okay to feel not okay, but I hate that term, right? But then you followed it up with something else that was more, hey, this is part of the process, or you always seem to be able to word things in a way where you're giving hope at the same time that you're affirming the pain that someone is feeling. And I think that's probably, if I had to make a wild guess, part of the reason for your growth is because those messages are so important. You're not just throwing a positive affirmation at me, you're acknowledging what I'm going through at the same time, and that's so important to not try to gloss over with some happy joy comment, because it's just not that simple.
Yeah, I definitely didn't want to be known as the toxic positivity kind of feel good stuff. And like one of the things that I've often said is that a lot of people might say, oh, I've recovered from whatever it is and I'm stronger than ever. And I always say I was strongest before all this happened. I'm stronger now than I was when I first got ill, but I'm nowhere near as strong as I was before I got ill at all. There's nothing positive about the struggle for 20 years with post-traumatic stress disorder, apart from the fact that you've managed to recover. But it's not, some people will try and give it some sort of like spiritual significance, or maybe they say that people with schizophrenia are the ones who see the world as it really is. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I've made the best of a bad situation that I wish hadn't happened in the first place. I haven't become a stronger person because of it. Any strength I've still got is in spite of it. I want people to know that they can recover, but it's not an easy path, and therefore it's best if you don't feel alone. And it's the not feeling alone part that I try to get across in my Substack, is that you can do it with other people that know what that's like.
And I think that's in any situation. I think I said that before we were just talking. I made that comment that, yes, in any situation, as long as you don't feel like you're alone, you can make it through and find a way. And I think I'm going through my parents' end of life kind of stuff. They're both on hospice. And I think right before I had the hospice, before I got them back at home, I was feeling extremely stressed and very alone because I didn't know what I was going to do. I'm the only one really that takes care of them. And when I finally got the services there and I got more people to talk to and basically, and friends, great friends like Beth, who has been through that, I started feeling so much uplifted and better and less stressed because I knew I am not alone. I've got people to help. I know what to do now. But yes, and that is makes a huge difference in your life.
Yeah, and some of the advice I got when I started off writing was that there's two ways you can try to reach other people through writing. One way is to be like the leader, so you're up the front giving advice and telling people what to do. And the other way is to be a guide, which is you're still figuring stuff out yourself and you're walking alongside the other person, so you're not the leader but you're guiding them along. And I'd much rather prefer the guide because I'm still figuring it out as well. I've got no formal qualifications in any of this stuff. So whenever anyone asks my advice, I always say I am not qualified in anything, but these are the things that worked for me. Maybe they can work for you too. And it makes me feel better as well because then I'm part of the group where we guide each other, not me out the front claiming to be some kind of guru that's got all the answers, because I've got very few answers. I just know what has worked for me.
And I love your LinkedIn posts. I like the one about people who are impactful. It was very well written. It was very concise, and it really resonated with me. The tips that put in there about being cognizant of boundaries and time management and listening and being intentional. Those are such relevant and good things, and I think about that all the time, about people that really don't care about my time, and am I that person too, and how can I be better at being a person of impact? So thank you for that.
Yeah, time is the most important thing that we've got. When people don't value your time, that's my pet hate, especially when it comes to things like workmen coming round for an appointment. You wait in all day for them to come, and then at the end of the day they say they're not coming and things like that. Really,
Yes.
It really gets to me. And podcasts, like if you was going to do a podcast and the guest didn't show up, how infuriating it must be.
Yup.
We have that. Yeah. What role, because I don't know, this just popped in my head as you were talking a few minutes ago, what role does self-compassion play as you're healing from trauma and PTSD?
Well, one of the biggest things I noticed is that some of the ways that I would talk to myself were disgusting. It was like, would I talk to anybody else the way that I'm talking to myself? Exactly. And unless I really hated them, the answer was no. There's no. I always say now that you should speak to yourself like you'd speak to a best friend. And if you knew someone that was really struggling and couldn't get out of bed, would you stand at the side and berate them and call them useless and weak and pathetic, or would you try and understand and come up with some answers as to how they could feel better? And I think depression as well. Depression is like, it puts you in a prison that you've made for yourself, and you're like the cruelest guard. And part of getting out of depression is relearning how to talk to and about yourself in a positive way. And it's not arrogant to be positive about yourself. Some people are afraid that it is. But when I was talking earlier about from bullied to bully, I feel like the middle ground again is where it needs to be. So you've got no confidence, arrogance, and then in the middle you've got just normal confidence, and that comes from being able to speak to yourself in a positive way.
Okay. I think our time is just about up, so I wanted to segue back to your Substack, and I don't know if you have other social media that you would like to share with our audience, because I feel like a lot of people would like to check you out on Substack. So you want to give your details, and please know, audience, that they will also be in the show notes.
Yeah, there's no other platforms really. I channel everything towards my Substack, which is Trauma to Strength at Substack, and I've got other platforms that I copy and paste stuff from Substack to, but Substack is the place where I spend most of my time.
Yep.
And it's Trauma to Strength.
Trauma to Strength. Thank you very much. Yes. We appreciate your time and your insights today.
Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah,
you're
and
just
you.
really just amazing for everything that you've gone through. I admire your strength. So thank you.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, and I run across, I think I look you up at least once a week just to see what you've posted recently on Substack, because I just find it to be meaningful and relevant. And it doesn't even, some of the things that you post don't even have to do with, they're just resilience oriented, and not so much that not everything that you write is specific to a certain struggle. It is just uplifting in many ways.
Thanks. Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Thank you.
All right. This ends this episode of Social Leopards. Everybody, see you next week.
See you next week. Have a great week. Bye.
Hey, Social Leopards. Don't slink back into the jungle quite yet. We have 2 important messages to share. First, remember to like this episode, drop us a comment, and if you haven't done it yet, follow this show or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can reach us on social media. You can also email share@socialleopards.com to contact us privately. All links are in the show notes. We love and appreciate hearing from those who listen to the show.
Second, we want you to know that this show is not intended to be a replacement for professional therapy. If you are struggling, or if you need to interact with another person, check out the show notes for resources. Thanks for listening.